Hello S2, and this week we will be looking at what happened to the Vikings and what impact did they have on Britain. Now, what happened to the Vikings and the impact they had? So by the end of the lesson, your two main aims are firstly to be able to explain what happened to the Vikings, and then secondly to describe the impact they had on Scotland and Britain as a whole. So what happened to the Vikings? This is a wee link back to what you covered last week when you looked at Viking battles. So the Vikings are defeated at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 by the Saxons. Now, after this ultimately marks the end of Viking rule in Britain. Then, after the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, the Saxons, who had defeated the Vikings at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, they are then defeated by the Normans, who were a group made up of some original Vikings as well. So they defeated the Saxons at a battle called the Battle of Hastings in 1066, which some of you may have heard of. Then, as a result of this, a new age of Norman rule in England had started. So the Normans now ruled England after the Battle of Hastings in 1066. So ultimately, after the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, the Vikings were forced out of Britain. They no longer ruled Britain or had any power in Britain. So, task 1 on your worksheet, if you want to pause the PowerPoint here, you'll see in the assignment tab you have your task. So task number 1, you have a map to help you as well. You need to think about what happened to the Vikings. So why did Viking rule in Britain end? As we've just discussed, it ended due to their defeat at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Now that should help you to achieve the first aim today, which is to be able to explain what happened to the Vikings. So we should now know that they were defeated at the Battle of Stamford Bridge and this forced them out of Britain. Now, what sort of things did the Vikings do for Britain? So what sort of impact did they have? Now, the areas that they had an impact in: farming, so they helped farming to develop. Our language, so we'll find out that some of our words are actually from the Viking language. Shipbuilding, as we know, the Vikings were very good at building their longboats, so they helped build other boats. Skiing, they actually brought skiing as a sport to Britain. Combs and razors, so the Vikings encouraged people to look after their appearance, especially through the use of combs and razors. Obviously not like the electric razors that we have available today, but just sharp razors that they would use to cut their hair, cut their beards, and also the comb their hair, comb their beards to make themselves look good. And also we'll find out that they had an impact on Britain in terms of days of the week, and they're linked to Viking gods and goddesses. So, just in a bit more detail, what did the Vikings do for Britain? They helped farming to develop. Language, some of our words are influenced by the Vikings. Shipbuilding, they helped us to build ships. We know they were very good at building their longboats, very skilled, so they helped us with this. Skiing, they brought the sport to the west, so the sport of skiing was brought by the Vikings. Hair, combs and razors, so they like to look good. And days of the week, some are linked to Viking gods and goddesses as well. And we also find out that there are some names of places in Scotland that link to the Vikings as well. Now, again, if you pause the PowerPoint at this point, there's a YouTube link just for you to watch their wee horrible histories clip, which explains in a bit more detail some of the words that we get from the Vikings. So if you pause the PowerPoint here and watch that YouTube clip. As I mentioned, the Vikings also had an impact on Scotland in terms of places that we can still see today. So this is a long-term impact ultimately. So the Vikings had an impact on Scotland that can still be seen today. Some Scottish place names come from Scandinavian words. Some names in parts of the English language can be traced back to Viking names or words as well. So, for example, Scottish place names. So Dingwall comes from the Old Scandinavian word from thing, which means parliament. This is where a lot of Viking parliament would actually meet, in Dingwall. Caithness comes from Caithness, meaning the headland of the cats. Sutherland, if anyone visits Sutherland, comes from Sutherland, meaning land of the south. And Falkirk comes from Kirkja, meaning church in Old Scandinavian. So task number 2, you'll see on your sheet. Task number 2, you have A, B and C in task number 2. So part A asks you to describe how the Vikings had an impact in the following areas. The first one has been done for you, so you need to think about how they had an impact in farming, in shipbuilding, etc. You're then being asked to match the days of the week to the Viking gods and goddesses. So have a read over what the Viking gods or goddesses represent, and that should give you some clues. And places on the map. Think about what we just discussed there to try and identify the places on the map that are linked to the Vikings as well. Now, task number 3, we need to think about, did the Vikings have a long-term impact on Scotland? So you have a table on your sheet as well which says examples of short-term impact and examples of long-term impact. Now, short-term impact is things that only last for a short period of time, so the sort of thing that they had the short-term impact in. So you could mention, for example, that they built ships in the places that they stayed, so that was maybe a short-term impact at the time. Examples of long-term impact is impacts that we still feel today. So an example that's been done for you here is names of places in Scotland are linked to the Vikings, like Falkirk, like Sutherland, like Caithness. So have a think about some short-term impacts and some long-term impacts that the Vikings might have had on Scotland, and try and write down as many as you can for each site. And then your task number 4 is Viking runes. So this is the Viking alphabet, what they used in terms of writing. So your task here is to try and write out your name using the Viking runes alphabet. Okay, and that brings us to the end of this lesson on what happened to the Vikings and the impact they had on Britain and on Scotland. So our first aim was by the end of the lesson you should be able to explain what happened to the Vikings. So as we discussed, remember they were defeated at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and this ultimately ends Viking rule in Scotland. And describe the impact they had on Scotland. So if you think about the areas that you've looked at in terms of impact, so farming, appearance, our language, our days of the week, shipbuilding, places that are named after Vikings, all impacts that they had on Scotland. So see if you can describe some of the impacts to any friends or family members. Thank you.